Welcome to episode 34 of The Checklist by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Sharing is caring. No, it's not just a poster from grade school. It's the foundation of the internet and modern computing. Connecting and sharing data. You know, your Mac has a wonderful suite of built-in sharing tools, right? Some of them are straightforward, like file sharing and printer sharing. Others could use a bit more explanation, like remote Apple events. Of course, sharing can have an impact on the security of your computer as well. It's important to only share what you need to share and leave the rest of the options off. Whether you want to share information over your home network or you want to make sure that your computer is set up for sharing in a secure manner, getting to know these preferences will help you better handle your Mac. So on today's checklist, we'll cover the Mac's sharing preferences, what you can do with them, and the potential impact they can have on your Mac's security. Those include screen sharing, file sharing, printer sharing, remote login, remote management, remote Apple events, internet sharing, and finally Bluetooth sharing. Now, while that's kind of a big list, it can all be found in one place, the Sharing Preferences screen. To get there, you click the Apple icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, click System Preferences, and then click the Sharing icon. Also, we're working here on sharing options on a trusted home or office network. If you're going to be traveling with your Mac or connecting to an untrusted network, airports, coffee shops, places like that, you'll want to kill all the sharing services unless you absolutely need them enabled for a specific reason on an untrusted network. Now already that's a lot of information, and we haven't even started yet, but we're going to go ahead and get started now with one that sounds fairly straightforward, screen sharing.
Yeah, simply put, screen sharing does exactly what it says. It allows you to let another Mac user view your screen as if it were their own, from anywhere in the world. The user you've shared the screen with can move your cursor, open or close windows, enter text from their keyboard, and even start applications. A screen shared user can even reboot the machine, so this isn't a feature you want to use with anyone you don't explicitly trust. With that said, it's a very useful tool in certain situations. If you want to allow someone else to help you solve a problem with your Mac, this is quick and it's an easy way to give your friend access. When you set up screen sharing, you'll have the opportunity to designate who can share your Mac screen. You can restrict this option to only provide screen sharing access to specific users or allow anyone to request permission to share your screen. While screen sharing can be great when a family member or friend is helping you fix a problem on your computer, it does come with a certain degree of risk when it comes to the security of your Mac. Since a remote user can control your mouse and enter text on your Mac when screen sharing is enabled, it's extremely important to only enable screen sharing for people that you specifically know and trust. You're putting the security of your computer in their hands. A malicious remote user could do all sorts of bad stuff, such as disabling your Mac's digital defenses or sending themselves your sensitive files. There's a number of tech support scams that take advantage of screen sharing functionality in macOS. We've discussed these scams in the show in the past, but here's a quick refresher on them. You're surfing the web when suddenly you see an alert pop up saying your Mac is infected and you need to call some 1-800 number to fix it. If you call the number, the tech support scammers will walk you through the steps of enabling screen sharing, sometimes through macOS itself, other times through a third-party remote control program such as VNC or PC Anywhere. And then they proceed to take control of your computer to, quote-unquote, fix the problem, which didn't exist in the first place. They'll then proceed to charge you hundreds of dollars for their supposed service. These tech support scams are one very good example of the danger of allowing someone you don't actually know and trust in real life to remotely access your computer through screen sharing.
The next item on the checklist is file sharing.
Yeah, file sharing. Sharing your data is one of the most basic networking features out there. Enabling it is as simple as checking the box next to file sharing on the sharing preferences screen. And for any of these sharing services, it's usually as simple as just doing that, checking the box to enable the service or unchecking the box to disable it. So when you do enable file sharing, the practical effects are pretty basic. It allows other machines on the same network, both Mac OS or Windows-based, to see and communicate with your Mac. By defining folders as shared, other networked users can access these folders to add, remove, or view files. Depending on the level of access you provide, users can be limited to only being able to add files to the designated Dropbox folder. And despite the similar name, it has nothing to do with the Dropbox file sharing service online. I actually believe that Apple's Dropbox folder came first. So that aside, the utility of this feature is clear, especially for people with lots of machines on a network or with a family. Sharing data between computers is easiest over your home network. For example, maybe you set up a shared folder to store your family photos. You can define some permissions so you aren't giving free reign of your shared folders to anyone on the network. You can set folders to be read-only, or you can instead opt to only allow certain users to write data to that folder. Overall, it's a pretty straightforward feature. When used correctly, it can be very valuable. However, it does come with some security concerns. First, you need to be very, very careful when it comes to who you're providing file sharing access to and what files and folders you're allowing them to access. If you're just looking to quickly transfer some files over the network, Apple's got your back. By default, only your public folder is shared. It gives other users a place to put files on your Mac, but keeps them away from your important documents and data. File sharing is definitely something you want to disable when you're not on your home network, your trusted network, office network. Anytime you're traveling at a coffee shop, hotel, whatever, turn it off. There is no need to have your Mac advertising the fact that file sharing is enabled to all of those random people at the coffee shop.
It's basically like leaving your briefcase open when you go to the counter to get coffee or when you enter the restroom or something like that.
Exactly.
But come on, how fun is it when you join a public network and then you see all of the computers show up as shared devices?
That's actually, I remember a number of years ago at, I think it was at a hacker convention, computer security convention, people would share like music basically on the network at the convention. And I think this is either, back before everyone was afraid of everybody hacking everybody else, or maybe just young and naive. But I just remember that was pretty cool back when I was 17, 18. And now it's one of those things where it's like, no, you don't even want to bring your phone or your computer to any of those conventions. You want to leave that in a different state, preferably, just because it's pretty much asking to get hacked these days.
Oh, yeah, and totally be thoughtful when you actually name your computer. A lot of people will name their computer their first and last name. That's
a really good point. I think it's actually the default in Mac OS is your first and last name, like first and last name's computer. So, yeah.
It could easily make you more of a target if you're known, if whatever the case is, you're broadcasting that out there for everybody.
And just as an aside, your computer name is at the top of the sharing preferences screen. So if it does say your first name, your last name is iMac or MacBook, you can change that. You can change it to anything there. So you might want to do that just so you're not leaking potentially private information.
You mentioned sharing music a minute ago. I'm actually curious about iTunes sharing. It's not one of the things on the list here because it's actually not in that sharing preferences panel, but I think it's actually something in iTunes. Is there a particular security risk to that, or has Apple sort of strengthened the walls of iTunes so that playing something that's in somebody else's iTunes library is not the same thing as just giving them access to a folder full of music?
I don't know if anybody's actually looked into that, Ken. That might be a good thing to look into. I know it's a service that you can enable in iTunes itself. usually basically share your music, with your family across your home network. I'm assuming on the back end of things, they're doing something like a sharing service that is limited to just this music folder, and it's got whatever authentication in the background. But I'm not aware of anybody who's actually looked at the security of that and whether or not that would be better or worse than the typical file sharing. If you're just looking to share music, that's probably the better way to go about it rather than sharing entire folders of files. But that's actually a good point to look into further.
I just opened it up, and one of the options under sharing in iTunes is require password. So you could set a password for anybody trying to connect to your shared media library there.
So you would basically have to have a level of trust with that person, unless you did something goofy like put your password up on the bulletin board at work so that anybody could listen to your music and whatever else they might be able to do with that. Let's move on to one that seems fairly innocuous, I'm assuming. Printer sharing.
Yeah. Nowadays, a lot of printers will come equipped with wireless functionality, but it's not universal. You might have a printer physically connected to your home Mac, which is great when you need to print things. But what about everybody else? If you don't want to purchase a wireless printer, you'd likely still be able to let others on your network use it for printing. And here you'll want to look at the printer sharing options. Like file sharing, setting up this feature is easy and straightforward. If you have your printer connected to your Mac and ready to go, all you need to do is check the on box next to the printer sharing on the sharing preference screen. From there, you'll see a list of available printers in the window. Choose the printer you wish to share, and it will automatically be shared with everyone on the network. As before, if you'd like to restrict its usage to particular users, Apple allows you to do that. Just define them in the same window as you selected the printer. That's all there is for printer sharing. As far as security goes, this one doesn't pose much of a threat. I mean, sure, if you allow random people to utilize your printer, you might end up running out of paper and printer ink earlier than normal, but other than the environmental impact, there's not much of an issue here.
Sorry, I was just remembering something that somebody, I think I heard somebody say something about just they have a list of things that they print up randomly on any open printer they find. So it tends to be sort of embarrassing stuff, things like that, or like, pretend ransom notes or help, I'm locked in the basement, little things like that.
I saw one once where a neighbor had an open Wi-Fi network, and the guy would send stuff like, I'm your printer, I'm really alive, and just making random requests. And then the end of this post was a picture of the printer in a dumpster outside the house. Like the guy got scared and threw it away. It was, most likely a joke, but it was, that actually is something, we've discussed it before on the show to make sure that your Wi-Fi network has a password, is secure. If it's not, this doesn't matter if you have a wireless printer or a wired printer connected to your Mac. If you have an open Wi-Fi network, anybody can connect and print with your printer, if it's on that network. And that's when you'll, what kind of was this saying? You'll get some random printing stuff going on.
So while we're talking about printer security, a lot of the settings within the printer can be configured.
More advanced printers have some restrictions that you can put in place on the printer itself, but you're not going to necessarily see that on every printer. A lot of the home, the ones that are just sold for $50 at Target or whatever, that are geared towards home users might not have that level of capability.
So first things first is change the default administrator username and password. Because if you do allow for somebody to connect via Bluetooth or something else where somebody could just connect to it while not being on your wireless network, you have the risk of somebody being able to take over because you didn't change a username and password.
So what's interesting to me is, the next thing here is, unlike printer sharing, the next item on our list does come with serious security concerns, and yet it does seem like we're actually talking about some security concerns with the printers. But, these would be more serious, I suppose. Talk to me about remote login.
Yeah, well, with printers, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to run out of paper and ink. With remote login, it can get a whole lot worse. Everything up to this point has been pretty straightforward. But the remote login option is a feature that is much more geared towards advanced users. At its most basic, this is a feature which allows you to log into your Mac from another computer while you're away from home. However, it lacks the easy setup of screen sharing and requires you to know some key information about the machine. After enabling remote login, specified users can use the Secure Shell Protocol, commonly known as SSH, or the Secure File Transfer Protocol, SFTP, to log into your Mac via the terminal application from a different machine. Using this feature requires entering your username and the IP address of the Mac in question through the terminal's command line. Afterwards, you can coordinate file transfers and perform other operations. But again, that's more for advanced users. So for most users, it's not a feature that you'll often or ever need to use. From a security standpoint, it is best to leave remote login disabled unless you really know what you're doing.
And then up next, there's a feature that sounds similar to remote login, remote management.
Yeah, if you've ever looked at screen sharing before, you might have noticed that you can't enable both remote management and screen sharing at the same time. Remote management supersedes sharing. In other words, when you enable this option, this feature takes over the screen sharing functionality. Why? Well, remote management is a feature designed more for corporate environments or setups where many Macs are on the same network. It's more of a powerful administrative tool that allows for expanded control over the remote machine. Enabling remote management on the sharing preference screen turns on the service necessary for Apple Remote Desktop product to work properly. Usually, a system administrator will use this functionality for troubleshooting or software installation and other housekeeping tasks. Unlike screen sharing, though, which requires users to ask for and receive permission first, remote managers can access the Mac without any sort of interference with the computer screen. As with remote login, most home users won't have a need to enable remote management, especially since screen sharing fills many of the same roles. Security-wise, unless you're in an office environment where it's specified by your security administrator, you could leave remote management disabled.
Now, there is one more sharing feature that centers around working on your Mac from a distance. We mentioned them earlier. What are remote Apple events?
Well, when it comes to automating tasks on your Mac, Apple has a robust scripting environment in the form of AppleScript and Automator. This works great when you're at your computer, but what about those times you're not? If you've ever wished you could tell one of your Macs to do something without sitting down in front of it, this feature makes it possible. A remote Apple event is simply an action triggered by an Apple script sent to your machine from another Mac. For example, it could be telling the computer to shut down or go to sleep, or adjusting the volume on music playing in iTunes. The only limiting factor on what you can do with remote Apple events is your ability to code in AppleScript. To send commands, users can run the script through the terminal. Again, you must also know the actual IP address of the target Mac in question on that network. If you decide to turn this feature on, we suggest you define a limited range of users who have permission to run scripts on your machine. Otherwise, you're kind of opening up a potential security hole on your Mac. By restricting usage, users will need a username and password to authenticate their access to your Mac. There are plenty of tutorials out there on the web about what you can do with remote Apple events. So if you like to tinker and customize your Apple experience, this is a fun way to explore expanding the functionality of your home computers. But if you are kind of sitting here scratching your head going, what would I use that for? Best to just leave it off.
Two more items on the sharing preferences screen that we're going to hit this week. I'm guessing this is a bit like printer sharing, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. What is internet sharing?
Yeah, internet sharing is exactly what it sounds like. A way to share your Mac's internet connection with other devices. Setup is fast. Once you enable this feature, you only need to choose the connection you want to share, and then designate the sharing method like Wi-Fi or Ethernet. If you choose Wi-Fi, this instantly transforms your Mac into kind of a wireless router. This feature is useful if you don't have a Wi-Fi router at home and you need to get online with your iPhone or iPad, but it's even handier when you're away from home. Consider this: you're traveling and you're staying someplace where the only option is a wired connection to your MacBook. However, you prefer to use your iPad instead. By enabling internet sharing on your MacBook, you could provide a wireless signal for your iPad to use for a connection. It's also great if they charge per device connecting to the internet. Let's say you're at a hotel or something, so if your Mac is plugged in, you'll be able to share it from there. As far as security is concerned, there are Wi-Fi options you could use to set up a password for your shared internet connection in order to prevent strangers from being able to use your new access point. Obviously, internet sharing is a service you'll want to keep disabled when you don't actually need to use it.
And one thing to keep in mind there is that if you're not setting a password on it and strangers are using your connection, all that traffic is going to look like it's coming from your Mac. So if they're visiting naughty sites they shouldn't be, or using that connection to hack people, you're going to be the one who's getting in trouble there. So again, don't let weird random strangers use your Mac's internet connection. So if you have the feature turned on while you're traveling or whatever, make sure that that's something you turn off once you're done using it.
Now, I was going to ask, and this may be getting a little ahead of where we are today, but like you can go into Safari on a user account and do a little bit of sort of parental control kind of work. Can you do that kind of thing with sharing your internet connection as well? Or is that just sort of like, well, you're basically giving somebody Wi-Fi, and where they go on their machine and what they do on their machine is going to be affected by the settings on their machine, not anything you can do aside from turning it off?
Exactly. You're just turning your Mac essentially into a Wi-Fi router. Or if you've ever shared, if you ever use the personal hotspot on iOS to share your internet from your phone to your Mac, the other way around, it's the same principle. You're just giving a connection to somebody. They can use it however they want.
Yeah. So again, not something for the coffee shop. Last item on the list today, Bluetooth sharing.
Now, before we talk about Bluetooth sharing itself, we need to take a step back and talk about how Bluetooth is used in a larger context on your Mac. If you use an Apple wireless keyboard or mouse, you're already taking advantage of the Bluetooth capabilities of your Mac. Bluetooth has its own screen in the macOS system preferences and is generally enabled by default. You might be familiar with the Bluetooth menu bar icon, which kind of flashes and lets you know when it's time to replace the batteries in your Apple wireless keyboard or mouse. While the Bluetooth sharing feature utilizes the Bluetooth hardware in your Mac to work, it's a completely separate and optional setting to configure. Along the same lines, having Bluetooth sharing enabled on your Mac is different from having Bluetooth itself turned on. And to compound the confusion, you need to have Bluetooth enabled before Bluetooth sharing will work. So, with features like AirDrop, Apple already makes it simple to share files between macOS and iOS. But when it comes to non-iOS smartphones and tablets, it's not quite as straightforward. Thankfully, there's a solution for situations like that. Bluetooth sharing is one of the easiest ways to quickly share files wirelessly between non-iOS mobile devices and your Mac. The Bluetooth sharing section of the Sharing Preferences screen governs how your Mac will handle requests to share data over Bluetooth with your system. There are a few options to adjust here that can make your Bluetooth sharing experience smoother while allowing you control over where those files end up on your hard drive. You can choose how your Mac behaves when it receives a file. Will it just automatically save the file? Will it open it automatically, or ask you what to do first? The last option is always the best one because it gives you the chance to evaluate the sharing request and make sure everything is okay before allowing that new data on your computer. By default, macOS will save shared files from Bluetooth devices to your Downloads folder, but you can set a different file path or folder location in the Bluetooth sharing settings if you prefer. You can also make some folders on your Mac publicly available to Bluetooth devices. You just choose which folders you want to share, or set up the option to request your permission when a device wants to browse files. When it comes to the security of your Mac, Bluetooth sharing is one of the services that you'll want to leave disabled in most situations, unless you're specifically trying to transfer data to or from a non-iOS mobile device. However, it's okay to keep Bluetooth itself enabled, as it needs to be on in order for your Mac to communicate with your wireless keyboard and mouse.
Now, we just covered a ton of sharing stuff there. If you missed any of it, or if you want to revisit any of the issues that we did discuss, we have show notes that we want to share with you. You'll find those at securemac.com/checklist. That's notes for this show as well as previous and future episodes. Also, if you have a friend or a family member who could use some security help but doesn't get the whole podcast thing necessarily, they can listen to shows on that site as well. So jot it down, tell them about it at securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question or comment for us, we are programmed to receive. Checklist@securemac.com is the email address. That's checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You are listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.